Welcome back to TYT's The Conversation. It's Adrienne Lawrence once again. And this time I'm bringing you New York-based reporter for The Intercept, Alleen Brown. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Alleen, you really focus on environmental justice issues, and this whole climate and punishment conversation is something that is going on, especially right now with the Intercept data investigation. Can you tell the viewers a little bit about it?
Yeah, so with this project, my colleague Akil Harris and I spent more than a year mapping the locations of more than 6,500 jails, prisons, and ICE detention, juvenile detention centers against indicators of the climate crisis. So heat risk, wildfire risk, and flood risk. We put it all on a map so anyone can search for a facility or a community and learn more about the climate impacts that incarcerated people are facing right now. And then we dug a lot deeper into the stories of individual people, as well as looking forward at how these terrible situations are set to get worse.
And so when you're looking at this, you're looking at kind of how the impact of climate will, how that is related to in terms of the punishment and carceral, like the system itself. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple important things to keep in mind. I mean, one is just that the situation at these facilities where it comes to climate and the environment is very bad right now. And it's not just a matter of like the weather outside, it's also just the nature of incarceration that means that people inside are really sort of harmed when when there's, I guess, climate pressure or climate related disasters. Beyond being in a situation where people have virtually, certainly no ability to move, but also no ability to, adjust to their circumstances to become more safe and comfortable. They're totally reliant on the state. And the other thing that's important is that a lot of prisons in particular were built in the 1980s and 90s during the war on drugs and during this prison construction boom. So a lot of them are really old and deteriorating just as the climate crisis is deepening.
And so you have these essentially deteriorating conditions that aren't necessarily hospitable, especially for the number of inmates that are there. And is it compounding injury? What's the suffering going on right now?
Yeah, so again, we looked at these three factors and, as we looked at heat, we found just, what appears to be hundreds of thousands of people in the system suffering from really severe heat impacts every year. So we honed in on the story of one individual who had a kidney condition that deteriorated pretty severely during a year that he spent in a prison with no air conditioning. A large proportion of prisons in Texas, Louisiana, Florida have no air conditioning. And there's a lot of people with conditions that make them heat sensitive. Where it comes to flooding, we heard a lot of reports of, people having sewage water coming into their cells, a lot of power impacts where people, lose power and are stuck in really bad conditions as these storms hit. And it's sort of similar with wildfires. A lot of times the power will go out and, we looked at one facility where these guys were sitting with no lights for over a month at the same time that this wildfire is sending smoke into these confined spaces and the surrounding community is evacuating or preparing to evacuate while incarcerated people have no idea what evacuation plans look like or whether they're sound.
Wow, so this basically puts these individuals who are incarcerated in a very dangerous situation or position, and there's nothing they can do about it. And the thing is, I understand the fact is that the state is supposed to still care for individuals, even if they are incarcerated, and that there are certain limits there. We talk cruel and unusual punishment with the Eighth Amendment. And so when we look at where this is on that threshold of failures to protect and to care for individuals, essentially, where is this?
Yeah, so I mean, in Texas with the heat, and I think in Louisiana as well, there have certainly been arguments made that the circumstances amount to both cruel and unusual punishment and violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act. And some of those cases have been successful. So in Texas, they've had to start installing some climate control because of those kinds of lawsuits. I haven't seen the same where it comes to wildfires or floods, but these conditions are set to get very dire, even more so than they already are.
Definitely seems to be the case, especially as we're seeing climate issues, catastrophes, essentially just be exacerbated by the current situation. It would seem that individuals who are incarcerated will also suffer. And so when it comes to making change and alleviating some of this burden, what kind of response have you seen from lawmakers?
Yeah, so I mean, in Texas, there's been this fight over air conditioning that's led by family members of incarcerated people, and the system has been very slow to change. The Republican-led leaders there, Governor Greg Abbott, doesn't want to take leadership on this. There's also a contingent of organizers and directly impacted people who say that they don't want new infrastructure investments, and that the only meaningful sort of climate mitigation strategy for incarcerated people is to let people out and shut facilities down.
Wow, so I'm guessing that that's not necessarily something that a lot of governors are down for. But also we don't want to necessarily build more of these structures as much as we want to move away from kind of this carceral state. So I guess what truly would be maybe somewhere of meeting in the middle that can happen in terms of keeping individuals safe who are outside of facilities as well as inside of these facilities?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And I think that this stuff just has to be grounded in what people who are directly experiencing these issues are facing. So families in Texas are demanding air conditioning. A lot of people in California are demanding that facilities shut down. I think just listening to these communities and the people who have lived through this stuff is really the most important thing.
And also, I would imagine that prisons generally have been put in places that are less than ideal real estate, so to speak, and thus it might be closer to a hazardous waste location or something that is truly adverse to individuals' health. So I guess, is there anyone really leading the movement to, I guess, invest in more humane efforts when it comes to housing?
When it comes to
housing the incarcerated.
Oh, housing the incarcerated. Got it. Yeah, I mean, in terms of leadership, I think, well, again, it depends on how you're thinking about this. I would definitely point to the Texas prison community advocates in Texas, which is this group that's fighting for humane conditions and air conditioning there. In Florida, there's this group called Florida Cares that's doing a lot of work. And there's some, there are legislators here and there. There's this legislator, Diane Hart in Florida, who's from a community that's really impacted by incarceration. She's a Black woman and she visits prisons all the time and has consistently put forth humane conditions legislation. So I think in every community you find groups that are sort of really grassroots based and community based that are doing this. I mean, I would also point to Senator Tammy Duckworth, who has introduced some legislation that would require the Bureau of Prisons to disclose how they're impacted by disasters every year, and also to disclose how they considered early release or Yeah, or basically whether they've considered letting people out when disasters hit. So that's something that's kind of been neglected to two legislative sessions in a row.
And do you think it's something that kind of gets put on the back burner and gets neglected because we're talking about the prison population?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and this is something that I heard even in Florida. There's actually there's one Republican legislator in particular, but there's some movement on the Republican end, even more in the vein of like building new green prisons. But I hear even from them that this is just not something that policymakers can get much credit for. Like if you invest in education or roads, you can get a lot of political points, but not a lot of people are really thinking about. Not a lot of voters are thinking about incarcerated people, or that's what these policymakers perceive. So I think bringing more attention to this issue and making it something that they have to pay attention to is really important in advancing any decent policy.
Absolutely. And if I can ask, from your own experience very quickly, what do you think it's going to take to get people to care, to make the changes necessary?
I mean, that's a big question, and I just don't know. I mean, I think that we're facing just such a huge range of catastrophes as the climate crisis deepens that there's potential for communities and policymakers to become so overwhelmed that prisoners are even more pushed to the wayside. So I don't know. I wish I had a more hopeful message. I think that now is the moment for people to really start advancing some kind of better approach to all this.
Yes, well, thank you so much. We do definitely appreciate your message. Thanks for joining us, Alleen Brown, New York-based reporter for The Intercept.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.